The role of Sonderkommandos in the Holocaust, similarly to many aspects of it, is perhaps best documented through the personal recollections of those who witnessed, and sometimes even survived, the atrocities that transpired between 1938 and 1945 during the course of World War II. In German, Sonderkommando directly translates to special unit or special squad. These squads were small work units created by the Nazis in order to effectively run the death camps, forcibly assigning prisoners to carry out the dirty work. These groups were primarily comprised of Jewish prisoners, although not completely, with other prisoners being assigned to work on them as well. Between 1938 and 1945, inmates assigned to the Sonderkommando units were forced to do the absolute worst of jobs, ones that the Nazis' SS men refused to even carry out themselves. The tasks assigned to these groups typically involved dealing directly with the bodies of the victims from the gas chambers. The details and descriptions of these gruesome and horrifying tasks will be discussed later. The Last Jew of Treblinka is a memoir composed by the late Chill Rockman, a Holocaust survivor and prisoner at the Treblinka concentration camp. The piece is a captivating and historically valuable text, as it provides a unique and provocative perspective on the Holocaust, particularly upon the role of Sonderkommandos within it, as author Chill Rockman himself worked as part of one. Georges de Huberman, a French philosopher and distinguished art historian, provides a detailed analysis of the function of Sonderkommandos at the Auschwitz death camp in an excerpt titled "Four Pieces of Film Snatched from Hell," from his greater work, Images in Spite of All. In this piece, D.D. Huberman analyzes the role of Sonderkommandos through an in-depth analysis of 4 photographs which were able to be captured and preserved in secret by a member of a Sonderkommando unit at Auschwitz in 1943. D.D. Huberman points out that a major obstacle in understanding the function of Sonderkommandos was the Nazis' focus on eradicating these prisoners who had direct contact with the operation of the Holocaust's mass exterminations, making all accounts and documentation of the subject especially valuable. Although the quality of the photographs may leave something to be desired, the images still prove themselves priceless in their ability to provide yet another layer of proof and historical context to these events. The first job Rockman was assigned as a Sonderkommando was as a barber. After being deported with Jews from the ghetto in Warsaw, he was transported to Treblinka via train car. Shortly following his arrival at that camp, SS men asked the crowd who was a barber. Falsely claiming to be one, Rockman was able to avoid the first wave of prisoners being sent to the gas chambers. Although technically a volunteer, there were no privileges. As a barber, members of the Sonderkommandos such as Rockman were involved in the initial processes of the camps. Rockman recalls having to cut the hair off of women arriving at the camps immediately after they were unloaded from their train cars coming from the ghettos. If all the hair wasn't off after 5 cuts, Rockman explains, SS men would beat you for slowing down the process of their death machine. The majority of the work Sonderkommandos were required to do involved the bodies of the victims killed by the Nazis. The jobs they were forced to perform were incredibly gruesome, as they were forced into it with the Nazis unwilling or unable to do it themselves. By establishing Sonderkommando units as an essential cog in the function of the death camps, the Nazis were able to run the camps more smoothly and effectively, while avoiding the dirty work and not having to confront the consequences of their own actions all the while. In this image, D.D. Huberman explains that the people photographed are female prisoners who have been stripped of all their clothes. The photograph was taken by a Sonderkommando in secret, clearing out bodies from the gas chambers, and the women outside were soon to meet their fate within them. Clothes taken from the women outside were to be recycled by the Nazis for some type of resource, working to waste nothing in their incredibly detailed systematic killings. Rockman remembers removing the bodies from the gas chambers as being among the most brutal aspects of being a Sonderkommando, vividly recounting the screams of the victims he heard from outside the gas chambers and describing the bodies as being greatly discolored, distorted, and stiff from their slow and painful deaths. Here we see images of bodies being piled up outside the gas chambers. The Nazis stopped at nothing to take everything of value from their victims. Having already taken their victims' clothes, valuables, and other possessions upon their arrival at the camps and prior to their executions, the Nazis went a step further. Having asked earlier as to who was a barber, SS men searched for dentists. Again Rockman lied, claiming to have been a dentist, and again found himself working in a Sonderkommando unit. These so-called dentists were responsible for prying open the mouths of the deceased, looking for metal fillings. Any fillings found were to be yanked out with pliers and were sorted into the respectable groupings of silver, gold, and other materials. Nazi guards would take some for themselves, and the rest were to be melted down as a resource for the Reich. In 1942, Nazi troops discovered a mass grave in Russia, filled with the bodies of victims from mass murders carried out by Stalin. As Rockman explains, the Nazis realized that this too could happen to them, and that their ethnic cleansing would be discovered. Sonderkommandos were then ordered to dig up the mass graves and to resort the remains into full bodies, partials, and skulls in an effort to account for all the victims' bodies. These bodies were to be burned in order to destroy the evidence of the murders of the Holocaust, and to further erase the memory of the Jewish race. The ovens initially used to burn the corpses worked poorly, Rockman explains, leading to the construction of crematoriums built specifically for this purpose. Sonderkommando units, of course, were responsible for destroying the bodies. While Sonderkommando members such as Rockman and those working with Huberman were able to survive, the same does not hold true to the vast majority of those who served in similar positions. In fact, it could be argued that the treatment of individuals within these units was in fact worse than their fellow prisoners. Despite the chance to avoid the gas chambers for a brief period, nearly all of these men were systematically executed and routinely replaced. At the end of every few months of forced labor, Sonderkommando squads were executed and had their bodies burnt by their terrified predecessors in order to silence them as to what they had done. As Rockman recalls, Sonderkommandos were beaten regularly if SS guards deemed them to be working at a slow pace. If they disobeyed or attempted to warn prisoners of their fate, Huberman explains, they were burned alive. In efforts to prevent them from communicating with other prisoners, Sonderkommandos were often forced to quarter in underground cells, where food and water were even scarcer than in other parts of the camp. Chill Rockman was able to escape Treblinka in a 1943 uprising. Sonderkommando units around the camp were able to communicate and break into a Nazi arms shed and then cut through the fences of the camp. While many of the men involved in the escape attempt were killed, Rockman was one of several men who were able to escape into the forest and eventually hide amongst the population in Warsaw for the remainder of the war. Like many other survivors of the Holocaust, Rockman struggled to come to terms with why he had lived while countless others died. He ends his memoir, The Last Jew of Treblinka, with the statement, "I remained alive to bear witness against the great slaughterhouse of Treblinka," determined for his account to serve in the memory of the millions of victims at various camps of the Holocaust. In addition to the 4 photographs, much of Huberman's analysis is based upon the experiences of Philipp Müller, member of an Auschwitz Sonderkommando, and one of the few members of these units who was able to survive the Holocaust. Müller calls for people to imagine and remember these experiences and events in a poem he composed. Death by gas lasted from 10 to 15 minutes. The most horrendous moment was the opening of the gas chamber, that unbearable vision, people pressed like basalt, compact blocks of stone, how they collapsed out of the gas chamber. Several times I saw this, and this was most difficult of all. One never got used to that. It was impossible. Yes, one must imagine.